you, Allison. How are you doing today?
Yeah.
Is it great to be live?
Yes.
Can we
It's
get
great
that
to
other
be
one?
live. Yeah, I
Are you
want to
on?
you as well here.
You're good?
I'm good.
All right.
So I want to thank all of you for coming out today. My name is Michael Notaro. I look forward to this day of being live with people again and talking about real estate. Out of curiosity, how many of you here have 10 or fewer rental units? Put your hand up. Okay, most. How many of you here are from outside of Alameda County? Good amount, good amount, great. How many of you here have been managing properties for at least 10 years? Put your hand up. Whoa! You guys should be teaching me. I've been in the business 17 years, practicing law in Alameda. And like many of you, we've seen a lot of changes, haven't we? We've seen a lot of changes in the rental property business. And what I'm going to talk about today is probably your most important financial decision, along with your mortgage, along with capital repairs. We're going to talk about the who question. Who will be moving into your rental housing unit? We're going to talk about screening, helping you screen effectively to get a good tenant. I want to emphasize just how important this decision is. This is a crucial decision. To illustrate, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you had a bad tenant, what did you do? 30-day notice, right? Get them out, 30 or 60-day notice. Today, if you have a bad tenant, what do? Suffer. Suffer. It costs you. The bad decision to let somebody into a building who is not properly qualified can be catastrophic for your business. It can cost you money, time, stress, you name it. That's how important this decision is. Just as if you had a stock portfolio, the value of your portfolio is actually the individual stocks. As a rental property owner, the value is those tenants that you have in the space. So I'm going to follow kind of an outline that I put together that describes some of the basics. I want to just begin with one warning. I know we've had some people who've been doing this for some time. If you do not have a commitment for upgrading your screening process, this business is not for you. I'm sorry to say that, but I have to say that to clients all the time, that if you are not willing to do some of the things I'm going to talk about, which is to have an objectively verifiable financial criteria that goes with every tenant selection process, something that is uniform, not something that you do on Mondays but don't do on Tuesday, not something that you do for this applicant but not that applicant, okay? So you have to have a commitment for uniformly, non-discriminatory, I'm going to talk about more discrimination towards the end of the presentation, applying that. If you don't have that commitment, please don't stay in this business. Either hire a professional property manager or move on, because they are going to get you. I am amazed at the number of cases that come into my office, and easily 90% of them, when I look at the case and I ask the question, how did a landlord let this person into the rental housing unit? Okay, I know some of you are smiling, and I realize you may have purchased a property where a seller had some tenants. Where did these people come from? My gosh. So this is kind of like a landmine, okay? You guys have, when you're in a war zone, you kind of move around. If you step in the wrong place, it explodes. Okay? That's what we call one of the 16 protected classes that could be evidence of discrimination against you. So you gotta watch where you're stepping here, okay? Because if you accidentally step in the wrong place, kaboom. With that said, there is a right way to go. And that's what I'm gonna talk about, finding that objectively verifiable financial data, okay? So as long as you stay on the credit report, the household income, the employment experience, that criteria, that is where you want to stay. We're going to talk today about what is a screening process. A screening process is essentially an assessment that you use, like I said, on a regular basis, that helps you determine the likelihood that the tenant will fulfill their leasehold obligations. Likelihood. I have found, Ken, Barbara, I have found that people are predictable. Would you agree, Barbara? Now, I get up at the same time. I like to go to the same restaurants. People are predictable. Guess what? Our financial lives are too. Your best evidence is that financial data. The same way those tenants have dealt with past creditors, that's the way they're going to deal with you. Okay? Don't convince yourself they're somehow going to be different because you're beautiful and you're smart and you love them. It's predictable. And the tenant review process is just looking at the likelihood that they will be good tenants. So while we talk about this, let's talk about what is a good tenant. Now you guys know, right? What is a good tenant? A good tenant is a tenant that pays their rent when? On time. On time. Whether it's the first of the month or the 15th, they pay their rent on time. A good tenant is someone who maintains your rental property. Agree? Some tenants are extremely gifted at destroying rental property. Mysteriously, there are walls in the holes in the wall. The carpet's devastated. The appliances are broken. Tenant maintains your property. And then number 3, number 1, paying rent. Number 2, of course, maintaining your property. Number 3 is they comply with the house rules. All of you should have rules and regulations for your rental units. They comply. That means that they don't dump their garbage out in the common area, right? It means they don't hang their laundry on the balcony. It means they don't play Led Zeppelin all night at 120 decibels. So that's what you're looking for. Tenants who are respectable, responsible, and reasonable. Respectable, responsible, and reasonable. There's a lot of good people out there. And so you need to have a process that helps you get there. Little overview of the kind of rental process. You begin, of course, with an empty rental unit and deciding on your terms, gathering up a modern lease, an AOA lease, or trade group. Do not, please, do not go surfing on the internet and download anything convenient. Use documents from respected trade organizations, AOA and others. They're vetted by attorneys. Use those documents. Have your lease ready. So you plan availability of a unit. Number 2, you advertise it in some respect, right? So you get the word out, and each of you do that differently. Craigslist, put a sign on, whatever. I'm going to talk about some traps in advertising. Number 3, you distribute a rental application, right? All of you put your hand up if you have a rental application. You put a rental application in. Number 4, you accept a tenant. and maybe reject a tenant. And then number 5, you onboard the tenant. Professional procedures to get them started in the tenancy. So it all begins with the rental application. What can you say and not say? Remember my analogy of walking through the minefield, okay? You're walking through the minefield. Now, I served in the U.S. Coast Guard. Have any military people here? Right there, in the back, fantastic. So I'm sitting in a management office, having an applicant walks in. I notice that they have a pin from U.S. Army or U.S. Navy. Jim, man, it's great were you in the service? Yeah, I was in the service. I have a nice conversation for them while they're filling out their application. Any problem? Big problem. Jim wasn't qualified. Jim was rejected, and Jim is going to claim discrimination based on military status. 16 categories I'm going to go through and spend some time with that you need to watch out for. They're kind of like those little snakes that jump up and grab you. And if you're a mom and pop landlord that's used to being the friendly guy, and I know a lot of you I talk with, you're very friendly, and that's wonderful. Just be aware, if you ask the wrong question, you're in trouble. So what questions can you ask? Let's talk about that rental application. Some basic things you should have. The legal name, obviously. Social security number. What if they don't have a social security number? Toby, what do we do? Toby doesn't know. It's actually okay if they have a taxpayer identification number. So some people are here, they're resident aliens, they just don't have a social security number. So you get the TIN number, driver's license, date of birth. Can you ask about the date of birth? A little bit of disagreement with attorneys on this. Some attorneys feel date of birth could lead to a claim of what kind of discrimination? Age. My opinion on date of birth is that it's okay. And I reason that you're going to get it from the welcome, ma'am. You're going to get it in the credit report anyway. So I'm actually okay with date of birth. But it is a concern. You have to be careful. Obviously, the contact information, source of income. Is that an important question?
Yeah.
Very important. Remember what I talked about? Financial criteria is paramount. Rental history. Prior landlords. Is that any good for you? No. Not if you don't get good information. But yes, you want to ask about those prior landlords. Personal references. Number of occupants. Pet information, you can ask that. You can still actually have, believe it or not, a no pet building if you want. That's your policy and you have it consistent. But obviously, handicapped, emotional support animals, all those kinds of things are still going to be able to come in, but you can establish your policy if you want. Financial information. Now let's talk about a very likely scenario here. You've got an available rental unit. Applicant shows up, you don't feel very good about it. Barbara, you don't feel very good about it. Bill, you don't feel very good about it. Bill, they say, can you give me your rental application? What do you say?
Yep.
Absolutely. Okay, so you got it. Everybody who asks for a rental application, the answer is yes. Yes. Immediate. Okay, quickly, sir.
Can they ask them before they see the property? Can you deny them for not seeing the property first?
So my position, sir, is that most of my clients have rental apps posted on their websites, and you want to make that accessible to anybody. Anybody, okay? Now, that doesn't mean you're going to accept them. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm just saying we get claims from Fair Employment Housing, and they're the people that come after you usually, that you didn't give that rental application because this person is in a protected class. Okay, even though that's not why, I'm not trying to say that you're discriminating. I'm just saying you have to be aware of that. 3 applicants for unit number 203. How many rental applications do you need? 2? 3. Everybody who's coming into your rental housing unit, you request a rental application. What if they don't fill it out? Okay, so my recommend to my clients is you hand it back. Jim or Susie, I'm sorry, you need to complete the rental housing application. Okay, pretty much like that. Your application should ask for their permission for what? Credit check. Credit check. Your permission to contact their employer, right? Permission to reach out and check the references. All of those things should be part. The application should also ask a question. We're going to talk about it. Have you been evicted or experienced bankruptcy? Do you think that's important? Yes, very important. So we're going to talk about that. Some of that information is unmasked. So you gather together the application. Step number 1. Make sure that screening fee is below the statutory minimum, whatever it is. Some of my clients only charge $35, $40, whatever you do, just make sure that it's a minimum, that it's below the maximum for the state of California. Asking for written permission. Next, you're going to watch out for any questions. Remember I talked about the minefields. Boom, boom. Hey, Ken, are you married?
None of your business.
Okay, good. That is a question you would not want to ask. Why? Discrimination based on familial or marital status. So you don't ask the question, are you married or not? Now you may be curious, 2 people come in together. What are you, partners? That's a curiosity you do not have answered. Okay? Another question. I won't do this to somebody. Are you an alcoholic? You would never ask that, right?
They're not gonna, even if they were, they're not gonna.
Believe it or not, alcoholics are a protected class now in the state of California. So what does that mean? Does that mean you have to rent to a drunk?
No.
No, it doesn't mean. It means that the alcoholic status cannot be used in a discriminatory way. If the alcohol, on investigating the application, and you find out that alcoholism means Harry can't hold a job, Harry dissipates all his money so he can't pay rent, then you have objectively verifiable financial data from which to make the decision, you see? But the fact that he happens to have been an alcoholic, happens to have been a drug dealer, a user, not gonna work. Potential discrimination grounds right there.
What about a child molester?
Child molester, this is a tough one. Okay, this is a tough one with Megan's Law. I do recommend, Ken, that all my clients do the Megan's Law check, go to the database. It's in horrible condition. It's outdated, it's never accurate. But it's a little bit of a conundrum in the legal world because if a sexual predator comes into your building and inflicts violence, you're gonna be liable, okay? However, you also can't discriminate against them based on their status. So I know that's a little bit of a waffle of an answer, but it's kind of a tough one in the law right now. But that. So where were you born, Charles?
Berkeley, California.
Berkeley, fantastic. Is that a bad question to ask?
Yes.
It's a horrible, illegal question to ask. Has nothing to do with financial qualification. Where were you born? It has to do with national origin. Could be used against you in a legal action claiming you're discriminating against people born outside of the United States. By the way, maybe you like going to church and you ask the question, what religion are you? Okay, another one, no good. So you see where I'm going with this. You just have to be careful of where you step. Okay, you have to be careful where the conversation goes. Now, I had a client recently who had a plant. You guys know what plants are? They grow nice and green over there in the corner. But believe it or not, the Fair Employment Housing has testers, plants. And they could be at your building right now. They could be at your building right now, and they bring in people to test you, to determine if you are complying with discrimination laws. We had one that was a little bit like this. First applicant comes in, Asian woman who is very attractive, graduate of UC Berkeley, great job in the high-tech world, charming, really nice person. Same time, Jeremy comes in. Jeremy didn't graduate from City College. He works in a field called social justice, okay? Jeremy's some minority classification, I can't remember. The catch is, the Asian woman moved a lot before she applied, and the credit from her credit card went to the wrong place. She has a low credit score. But the fellow from City College, the social justice worker, just happens to have a little bit higher credit score. Who are you going to accept?
What's their income?
What do you think? Be careful. Be careful. If you are going just on the appearance, the education, the tester is going to hit you based on discrimination. If your criteria, it should be that financial criteria. So if you're using the financial criteria, and this guy actually has higher credit score, that is not an easy process to be involved in. I'm not suggesting to you that this is easy. I'm suggesting you need to be very cautious. You need to be very careful, because it can happen to the nicest people, So you pull the credit check after you get the application, and you go ahead and see how they line up financially. Can you pull a criminal background check?
Yes.
All over the place here. Have to be really careful with criminal background checks. Some cities outlaw criminal background checks. Richmond, Oakland, Berkeley. Can't use criminal background.
How about Contra Costa?
I don't know about Contra Costa, but you have to be careful. Most of the cities, there's also some state regulations on this, because remember, an arrest cannot be used against someone. An arrest is not evidence of anything. All it means is you got picked up by police. You haven't been convicted or anything. My personal position on this, talking to my clients, is I believe you can get a lot of the good information you would have gotten in a criminal in other places in the credit report. So be careful with criminal reports. Safeguarding the credit reports. Remember that when you here's my position on these credit reports. You get them, you review them. If the tenant's got a bad credit report and they do not qualify for your building, what do? Here it is, John. No open policy, no attempt to conceal or fool them. If you don't qualify for the building, you tell them openly. They paid for the credit report, you give it right to them. You say, look, I'm sorry, Jimmy, I'm sorry, Susie, you simply do not qualify. You have a right to do that. That is not discriminatory. That is inherent in your right to run your rental housing business, which financial payment is central to operating that business. to say to a potential tenant, I'm sorry, you do not qualify financially, and I'm informing you so. No problem with that. We talked about Megan's Law a little bit, and if you want to check that, you want to call all the landlords. Now, what kind of success do you guys have when you call the previous landlord? Okay, Barbara? What happens? Huh? Lying? I heard lying over here. Here's my secret. Call the previous landlord. He lies to less likely. Less likely. If you call back 2 landlords or 3 landlords, you're likely to hear the real story. Okay? At least you want to make the calls. You want to try. Right? Keep meticulous application records. Why is that? Because someone can come knocking, right? Fair Employment Housing Department comes knocking. Oh, we have a claim that's been filed against you for discrimination. Do you have records that prove that you have a non-discriminatory policy in reviewing applications? So I've seen the lists long, they subpoena documents. You have to treat every application with meticulous detail as if it could be challenged, okay? What about evictions? Who wrote that? Oh, I wrote that.
I'm sorry, when you say you have to keep meticulous record, you have to keep the applicants you don't approve of?
I believe you should for at least 3 years, man. I believe you should because you're going to have to show evidence of verifiable, objective, financial criteria that caused you to select that tenant, okay?
No, the ones you don't select.
Even the ones those are the ones that are going to sue you.
Especially them.
Those are the ones that are caused the problem. So while we're bringing this up, remember you need to also be very careful about safeguarding that information, especially financial data. You don't want people just wandering into your management office, pulling out credit reports. They are subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. So you have to be careful with that very personal financial data that you have for people. Now it gets outdated pretty darn quickly. But yes, my belief, ma'am, is that you keep comprehensive records for at least 3 years, 3 to 4 years.
It's also good to remember that when you get a credit report, the credit information is purged after about 3 months. So you want to print that out and put it in a lockable file cabinet.
Exactly. So never, let me get a glass of water here. Never, things never to do, never accept an incomplete rental application. Here you go, Susie, fill it out. Here you go, Harry, fill it out. Never rent to a tenant who lies on their rental application. Does that happen at all? Okay. Because if they lie on the application, who else are they going to lie to? You. Never allow temporary occupancy in the rental unit. Kathy, I've got to tell you something. This is a hard luck case. Would you mind if we just moved somebody in who's, been on the street? That rental, it's empty. Would you mind if we just moved them? They'll only stay a week or so. You gonna do it?
No.
No. Okay. Kathy's really smart. Are they gonna stay a week?
No.
No. Don't fall for it. People call my office all the time. Don't fall for it. I had a client call last week. She's a wonderful lady who allowed somebody into the house that she didn't know. Within 24 hours, this person was pulling apart the house. They were in the basement. They were actually pulling apart the house, and they had already hired a tenant's rights attorney to sue the landlord and take the property away.
What?
Yes, my client made the mistake of just letting hard hardship. Not like Kathy, letting anybody in the house to stay. So, this is a serious business. Be careful. How about a holding deposit? I just don't quite have the money for first, last, and security right now. We've got a Hastings graduate. Is it Elizabeth?
Yes.
What are you going to do about that, Elizabeth? You've got a tenant who's interested, filling up, but they just don't quite have enough money. Will you take a holding deposit, pull the property off the market while I try and get a little extra money?
My criteria are you have to have all those funds available.
Okay, good. Don't do holding deposits. I think they are problematic, not necessarily illegal, but problematic because it's confusing. What happens? What happens if they don't come up with the rest of the money? Then who gets to keep that money? Okay? I don't like holding deposits. Never promise something you cannot deliver. Never promise something you cannot deliver. They'll catch you on it. Never play favorites with applications or tenants. So remember, everything I am talking about here today, this applies to the screening application process. It also applies to the entire life of the tenancy. So any conduct that you have that could be perceived as discriminatory during the life of the tenancy is going to get you in trouble. You love that tenant in number 203, and they're struggling to pay their rent. I'm not going to give unit 203 a 3-day notice. But that tenant over in 117, I can't stand them. All right, Kathy? I can't stand them. They're getting a 3-day notice. Opening yourself up for a discrimination claim. Disparate treatment of similarly situated people. One tenant's in default, one tenant's in default over here, but you're treating this differently. You see what I'm talking about? This also applies to empty rental units. It applies to steering. What does anybody here know what steering is? What is it?
It's when you don't want like maybe kids on a certain floor level and you try to direct them to maybe downstairs versus upstairs.
Excellent, excellent. You decide in your infinite wisdom, oh, no, I don't think I want to show you this unit. I'm going to show you this unit over here. Steering gets people in big trouble. Don't do that. Don't do that at all. Things a landlord should always do. Always dig deeper if you are uncertain about the income source. Okay? You get a rental application that comes in, you're just not sure the applicant really makes that money, really has pay stubs, really has evidence. One of the places this comes up frequently with my clients is self-employed people. Okay? Self-employed people. What do? You got the answer, sir? Okay.
4506T. IRS form 4506T.
4516, okay, IRS form. I think it is entirely possible that you can ask for IRS tax forms, redact things, but you can stretch more on this economic qualification issue. You can ask questions to try and verify what the income really is. That's the place where you want to stretch, okay? That's the place where you want to ask the questions respectfully, because otherwise you're letting somebody into the building, you have no idea whether they are really qualified.
I get it from the IRS direct. I don't
Great.
ask for their tax returns because that could be phony too.
Okay.
So that's the 4506. I think it's C now.
To verify the accuracy,
Yeah,
Erica?
so they fill out a one-page form with their social security. I submit it to the IRS and they give me what they make.
Great, okay, with their permission,
Oh, yeah.
okay, with their permission, but understand you have to verify it.
Form.
Have to know if that's crucial to your business. Apply objectively verifiable financial criteria, as I said 3 or 4 times, as being and here's the important thing. Once you get that criteria, you stick to it. You stick to it. Hold consistent on your process. Avoiding the discrimination trap. I'm going to go a little deeper now into, we have some time, right? I'm going to go a little deeper into the discrimination aspect. Many of my clients will come to me and say, I don't have any discriminatory intent. And I know most people here do not either. It's just very, very rare to find someone who's actually intentionally discriminatory in today's market. I always say to them, I don't care. What I care about is, does your behavior in the aggregate have a discriminatory impact or result? That's where you need to be careful. Let me give an example. I have a wonderful client. She's from Hong Kong. She has all kinds of rental housing units. She loves to advertise. She always advertises in the Chinese newspaper, and only in the Chinese newspaper. Is that a problem? Big problem. Now, she doesn't listen to me, but that's a big problem because she is targeting only those that speak Chinese. A lot of great people who could rent the unit who do not speak Chinese. Now, is she discriminatory? No, that's just naturally how she does it. But she's at risk. Avoid any rental housing practices that have a disparate impact. Never apply stereotypes or generalizations to applicants and tenants. Selection must be valid, and document everything that you do. I'm going to talk briefly about the 16 criteria. Jeff, how are you doing on time?
Great, take what you need.
I'm going to talk briefly about the 16 criteria that are protected classes that when you step on it, boom, it can go off. The first one we're going to talk about is gender identity and gender expression. Homosexual, heterosexual, transsexual, they are all welcome. Not just the identity, but the choice of how a person expresses themselves in their gender role. Man could decide to express as a woman as a man. That is all off limits for us as rental housing providers, okay? Discrimination on gender, on race, that's pretty obvious. Black, white, Asian, you don't discriminate based on race in any shape or form. Income source. This is kind of a new one. How many of you have ever run an ad that says, no Section 8 apply? You can't do that anymore. You can't do that anymore. So you have to consider Section 8 alongside your regular applicants. Income source or wherever they're coming. Now with that said, you can still qualify them based on whether that income source is adequate to pay the rent for the particular rental housing unit. But you can't use just because they get federal assistance as the basis why they can't do it.
So a quick question on that. So the person's share, the rent is $500 and your criteria is 3 times their income, 3 times the rental income, then is it 3 times the 500?
So you have to have whatever objective standard you have to apply that consistency. So a lot of people do not do the 1/3, the old 1/3 of income for rent. How many of you still do that? Okay, there's 1, 2 in the back. So whatever your standard is, Ken, you need to hold to it.
But I mean, does that mean you don't count the subsidy? So in other words, somebody could get in, but let's say they're only paying $200 rent, their share of the Section 8 of the $2,500 a month apartment. then they only have to make $600 a month if that's my rule, or?
I would qualify it based on the HUD component, okay? So the part that they are actually paying, remember, they're getting government assistance for, depends on the HUD contract, sometimes it's 70%. I've actually seen them as high as 90% at times.
Numerical example.
It gets tricky because, especially in Oakland, they will switch it around. In other words, the Section 8 tenant will do something they don't like and they decide, maybe you should pay a greater percentage of your income. So there are a lot of details, and I can't kind of dig quite into those details. You guys can come up afterwards if you want, but you need to be aware that this is dangerous ground here with the Section 8 sort of thing. Personal characteristics. Erica, I got news for you. You know that application for that property out in Concord? We just found out it's a tenant's rights attorney. Okay. They're qualified, Erica. They meet your economic criteria. Everything else is fine. One detail. It's a very well-known tenant's rights attorney that spends their time at Hayward litigating cases against landlords. Is that basis to decline? No. I love having fun with this. The answer is no. The answer is no, okay? Because you are discriminating based on the occupation, right? You may want to. Very good, sir, okay. But you don't. You don't. You treat them equally. If he or she is qualified, you treat them equally across the board. Here's another big one that we're dealing with a lot, age. Age discrimination. This is a hard one. How do you deal with this to avoid? We very often have applicants to buildings who have Alzheimer's, who have diminished mental capacity. We do not want to discriminate based on age. However, if there are identifiable facts that indicate that the person cannot take care of themselves, they leave the burner on. I've had that case, okay? Elderly tenants leave the burner on and burn the house down. They leave the front door open for days. Age is a hard one. It's very emotional, but you cannot discriminate just on the age. However, if you have identifiable facts that indicate the person cannot, live independently in the rental housing unit, then you have the basis. Does that make sense?
How would we know though? They haven't lived there.
So that's a tough question. So you want to do a full investigation, talk to the prior landlord. What's the prior landlord going to tell you?
They're fine.
They're fine, they're great.
Wonderful tenant, no problem. Just the kind of person you would want to have in your building. Okay. Folks, this is not easy. I'm not saying this is an easy process, but you need to dig and you need to be aware of these criteria. Marital status, I talked about that. Might be married, might be single. That's not grounds for declining. Religion, ethnic background, military history, citizenship, familial status. These are all protected categories in the state of California. One of the places where landlords get absolutely crucified is if you put something in an advertisement that can be deemed discriminatory. Why is that? Because if it's a comment made in the rental housing office, maybe one or two people are going to hear it. What happens if it shows up on Craigslist? You're in trouble. Here's a couple of them. These are real cases. 1-bedroom apartment. Only working adult supply. Only working adult supply. Got a problem? Phone's even ringing. My goodness. So it sets off a phone. That's how important it is. So you want to understand that your 10 applicants can be non-working as much as working, as long as they are qualified to pay the rent. No Section 8 allowed. We talked about that. Bad territory. This is one of my favorites. Young professionals preferred. Right? So we got different types of discrimination here. Here we're discriminating based on age, young. We're also discriminating based on occupation, professional. What does that mean? No contractors, no gardeners? This is one of my favorite. This came from one of my clients. 2-bedroom apartment, close to the local parish. Woo! Close to the local parish. What's the problem there? Religion implies a preference for the local parish. This is one we saw a lot. Not suitable for children. Right? No. Can't do that. Can't discriminate based on families and based on children. I'm going to give you another little admonition here. Someone walks up to you, because some of my clients get blindsided by the testers, and they ask you a question, ma'am, what kind of tenants live here?
Human.
How are you going to answer that?
Human being.
Human beings. Human beings.
Can you just describe who they are?
No.
Oh, really careful.
In general, you said a young couple downstairs, upstairs is a mom with kids.
Well, you can do anything you want, but be very careful there that these questions that seem so benign, what kind of people live here? Because if the demographic profile of your building diverges from the demographics of the area, it could be a tester. It could be a tester there for you. Here's another one. Sir, why don't I see more diversity in your building? Okay. So that's another question. Just be ready. Just be ready, because they come out.
And
Yeah.
what is the response to that question?
So the response to that question is that I would coach my clients. I have an objective financial criteria I use for selecting all applicants, and those people who are in my building are those people who were accepted using my objectively financial criteria to select a building. I realize you can start splitting hairs if your building is 13% African American and the neighborhood is 17% African American, okay? I'm just saying to you, you just need to be careful that these issues are kind of floating out there. They're floating out there all over the place. This is very, very common. Very common. When a tenant has a problem with something you've done, could be anything. Harry, you need to stop parking in a way that blocks the parking lot. Okay? Harry comes back and says to you, why do you treat me differently than the other tenants? Harry, there's nobody else blocking the parking lot like you. Okay? Need to be careful that you are uniformly handling all your tenant issues. That's why it's so important to have a uniform process that you apply. You get that paper trail, consistent paper trail. Because if it turns out that there was somebody else who was also blocking the parking, but you didn't treat them the same way as you treated this tenant, you could have a problem. I want to talk a little bit about lease guarantees. I'll have some closing thoughts for you. How many of you use lease guarantees? Put your hand up. Just a couple. Good, good. Lease guarantee. This happens, ma'am, very often when you have a young tenant who is in their 20s or in their 30s. Maybe it's their first rental housing unit. They really don't qualify and they don't have credit. But they want to rent your building. So you say to them, oh, do you have a guarantee? my dad lives in Alabama.
We call them cosigners.
Cosigners,
Yeah.
okay, so cosigners are actually a little bit different. So a cosigner would be someone who actually signs the lease, correct? So that means that everybody who is a cosigner is fully obligated for the leasehold obligations. They're similar. Guarantee and cosigner are kind of similar. Here's my position on it. Your ability to collect is only going to be as good as the cosigner. Now, if it's mom and dad living back in Tennessee and you got to hire an attorney to collect your money back in Indiana or Tennessee, it's a lot of work. Here's what I need to tell you is you only need to look at the criteria of the actual signing tenant applicant. If that person doesn't qualify, they don't qualify. Okay, period. You want to bring in guarantees, cosigners, you can certainly do that. But you can use your objective, verifiable financial criteria and just say, I'm sorry, you simply don't qualify. That's your option if you want. So, where does all this law come from? I actually had a long presentation. I didn't want to bore you guys, but there's just a lot of discrimination law right now. And it basically flows through 4 different levels. There's Federal Housing Act, you have federal law prohibiting discrimination, you have the state law, which is the Unruh Housing Act, you have municipalities, and sometimes you even have counties. So you have all the way from the local to the top anti-discrimination law that you need to be very, very careful about. The claims can come from a tenant's rights attorney who files an action in a federal lawsuit. That's really not that common. I don't see too much. What I see a lot of is the HUD, Department of Fair Employment Housing, administrative claims. They're all over the place. I get at least 3 or 4 in my office every single year. Somebody feels cheated because they didn't get the rental housing unit they thought you should have given them. They go to the Fair Employment Housing and you have a claim. You can also bring an action in small claims court asking for injunctive relief. When any kind of a claim comes, what do you want to do? Tender to your insurance. Tender, now they may take it, they may not take it. But you guys pay insurance. So tender the claim. Will insurance handle a non-discrimination claim? Could be hard. Could be hard. Here's the thing with insurance. I tell my clients, buy a lot of insurance. Buy a lot of insurance to protect. Insurance is property damage, bodily injury, personal injury. Have an umbrella policy. How many people with umbrella policies? Definitely need to have an umbrella policy, especially if your ownership is not in an LLC or corporation. Insurance companies will define a reimbursable claim based on a word occurrence. Has there been an occurrence that entitles the insured to get a claim? Let me just explain to you how this works real quickly. So Ken's property's down in Santa Cruz and the roof leaks, one big storm, the roof leaks. He files a claim with, who's your carrier?
State Farm.
State, oh no. Ken's in trouble. Ken's in trouble. He files a claim with State Farm. I actually had State Farm this morning. State Farm comes back and says, they send out the adjusters, they're up on the roof, climbing around, doing all this stuff. And State Farm says, seems to me, Ken, this is a pre-existing claim. an occurrence is defined as an accidental, unforeseeable damage event. So Ken would have gotten compensation if a tree had come over, accidental, unexpected occurrence. State Farm, I know, would stand by you on that. But if the seller of the property had a bad roof, pre-existing, unlikely Ken's going to get anything from it. Which leads me to our analysis of discrimination. Because discrimination is not an accidental, unforeseeable event. Most of the time. Most of the time it will be perceived as an intentional act. Insurance companies have a duty to defend, which is broader than the duty to cover. Let me say that again. Insurance companies have a duty to defend, which is broader than the duty to cover. That means they might provide you with an attorney, okay? But when it really comes down to it, and one of your employees did something that was intentionally invidious, discriminatory, they may not stand with you, okay? So you need to be really careful on this process. Be careful of if you have resident managers who are doing this, and suddenly the normal resident manager goes on vacation, someone new comes in and says, oh, come on in. Milt, we'd love to have you in the building. Okay? So the new person just waives all your procedures, and who knows what that new tenant could be like. So be careful. My closing admonitions for you guys, we'll have a couple questions. Let applicants know your criteria. Stick to your tenant review criteria, whatever it is, stick to your guns. Let applicants know why they were rejected. Ma'am, your application was declined because you do not have financial credit check didn't check out, employment didn't check out. That's perfectly fine. That's objective financial criteria. Perfectly fine to do that. That is a good question.
What was the question?
The question is, can you put the minimum credit score on the advertisement? I would think about that a little bit. Yeah, sir, you have an opinion? Yeah. I don't have a problem with it. I think you're being upfront, and I think you're being upfront so they know, exactly what it is. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. Let's see what else. Have an open door policy. Keep getting educated. These things change all the time. I mean, I have cases all the time. It almost changes overnight. Seek professional help when needed. Seek professional help when needed. So at this point, I've kind of come to an end of my presentation.